It is the 4th of March, and I am very fortunate to be joined here by one of our semi regular guests, Representative Ed Deal, House District 17, and just one of the voices of wisdom and reason in your first term, right? So you've ascended to this lofty height of somebody whose remonstrances are actually really worth they're worth watching. I'm just going to
Thank
tell
you,
you that.
Kevin.
Yeah. And folks, a remonstrance is kind of when you get to go and give a speech on the floor and kind of get to say what you really think, right? As opposed to just in the course of a back and forth debate, right? And so that means the long form comments that you're allowed to give, they're pretty interesting. You really do say some wise things, which I think does sway not only your fellow Republicans, but sways maybe some Democrats, which would be great.
Well, I hope so. That's the point. And we have a lot of work to do in this state, man. So it's a
Yeah,
tough slog in there.
that was the one thing I learned in a philosophy class I took in college is that the definition of wisdom is realizing how much you don't know, because you think that you possess a lot of knowledge, especially if you're in college, and then you get to the point and you realize, actually, I just identified what I don't know, and it's an enormous amount.
Knowing what you don't know is a step.
It's a step.
Yeah.
It's a big step. Sometimes you feel like you kind of
Yeah.
step in it, but yeah. So this is a big week for Measure 110, and
Huge.
that was the supposed to be the focus really of the session. And they started out, didn't they, with two very different bills. One that was put forward by at least some House Republicans to repeal, and then there was one that was aimed more in the direction of kind of window dressing, right? A Class C misdemeanor where it's something called deflection, which in politics, for me, deflection is what you do when somebody says something to you and you want it to go away and have someone else have to answer the question. You deflect it,
Yeah.
right? But now they're going to call that the form of treatment they're going to give folks in Portland. But what happened this week, particularly with Measure 110?
Yeah. So thanks, Kevin, for having me on again. So the Republicans, and I was a co-chief sponsor on this bill, House Bill 4036, and I think almost every Republican on the House side signed on to this bill, is what I would consider real reform for ballot measure 110. And so we took all the recommendations from the sheriffs, the chiefs of police, the counties, the cities, and incorporated those into a bill. And also, we took some things from one of the Max Williams initiative petitions that's out there. And I'll give you the highlights. It would have made hard drugs possession a Class A misdemeanor. It would have required treatment, and also it would have made it restored some things that the legislature or law enforcement had in the past to go after drug dealers. The other thing it did is it restored some fiscal accountability to everything, and by abolishing the ballot measure 110 oversight and accountability council. I want to make sure everybody understands that with ballot measure 110, we took cannabis money that was going to law enforcement and going to schools. We diverted that money into a large fund. We put a group in charge of it that doesn't believe in recriminalization, doesn't believe in required treatment, believes in destigmatizing drug use, believes in harm reduction, clean needles, clean foil, believes that the best thing we can do is teach people how to safely use drugs because they're just accepting most aren't going to get clean. That is their mantra.
And having Narcan everywhere, right?
Yes.
To save them when they blow it.
And that is not going to get us to where we want to be. And we have to abolish that group and redirect those funds to a group that's going to provide evidence-based treatment and recovery services. And so that's a kind of a high level view of of what 4036 had, but it never got a hearing. So what we were stuck with was 4002, which was the Democrat solution, which was a Class C misdemeanor, which could be up to 30 days in jail. Usually it ends up being a few days. And it was a fake fix, completely fake fix. And it kept all the money with the Oversight and Accountability Council. So thankfully, due to a lot of pressure from Republicans, from our sheriffs and DAs, chiefs of police, county commissioners, and an outpouring of community response, just demand change. The Democrats realized they can't stick with their original plan, and so I'd say they went our way a lot in some respects, and but it's still a bill with a lot of flaws, and that's why I didn't want to see the bill die, but I had to vote no on it because I needed to make sure that those flaws were highlighted and talked about.
Yeah.
But I can give you a kind of a nutshell of what the bill entails, hit the high points.
Yeah, that'd be great, because I think that one of the things about 4002 is it's obviously that's what's going to happen, right?
Yes.
But folks really want to know, like, they're really serious about whether or not something effective is going to be done. And I heard some interesting things on Friday from Max Williams. I got to hear him give a summary, a rundown of this, and it was fascinating. First of all, I learned something new from him. I learned that their original idea was just to put a ballot measure forward. The Drug Policy Alliance, the Soros-backed group that apparently spent $1 million trying to prevent from happening what is happening. So that's a big setback for them.
Huge.
It's a huge setback. But the other thing was they were just going to put drug decriminalization on the ballot. And then they said, you know what, this might work better if we combined it with treatment. And then, of course, once it reached the ballot title stage of things, that's pretty much all people thought it was going to do.
All people thought is, oh, we're going to give drug addicts treatment. Well, who can complain about that?
Yeah. And fund it with cannabis sales? Whoa.
Yeah.
That sounds good to me.
Sounds good. So here's the problem that we have. If you read the bill or read the ballot measure, you go, no, that's not what this is about. This is about decriminalizing drugs.
Yeah.
And so people who voted for it felt deceived.
Yep.
And I hope it's a lesson. If you're going to vote on something, read the bill, read the ballot measure. And when I'm in the legislature, I read the bill. This was a long bill. And I read the whole thing. And there are some good pieces to it for sure. But there's some pieces that are not so good. And I should say Max Williams was also involved in this to get the Democrats to move in our way. So what the bill did is created a new level of misdemeanor, a Class U. It's called a drug enforcement misdemeanor, and it only applies for in this situation. But it basically creates a system where drug possession is a crime. It's a DE misdemeanor. And so a law enforcement officer has the choice of arresting that person and booking them, in which case they can pursue a diversion program, which would be monitored probation, basically, where they get a treatment program. Or they can face jail time. Now, the counties get a lot of discretion on how that's handled, but that's the way it works. And there's multiple, it's designed that you expect, hey, this person may not succeed in probation the first time. There's multiple avenues for them to try probation again, but ultimately they could end up serving 180 days, up to 180 days in jail.
So somewhere between the 30, which probably would have only been a couple days,
Yeah.
in the year, which I think up to a year that the Class A could have been. So this is like splitting the baby a little bit, but not bad.
It is a little bit, but the thing is, with a Class A, this actually, I'm being told by the law enforcement folks, this actually has a little more teeth. It's more of a structured program, more like you'd have in a felony case. Instead of a Class A with like an unsupervised probation, this is a supervised probation program.
Okay, so what happened to deflection? Does deflection that's gone? Now it's diversion.
So they had originally they had this completely unworkable deflection program, and what they mean by deflection is pre-booking diversion. So the idea was law enforcement would come and say, "Hey, you have drugs. That's a misdemeanor, but instead of arresting you, I'll give you the option to go into treatment." But the way they structured it, it was required for every county to do it, number one. And it was structured in a way that we heard from law enforcement said, this is unworkable. We cannot work with this program. So the House Bill 4002A, when it was reworked, what they did is they said, you can do the new diversion program or a deflection program. Let's call it pre-booking diversion.
Yeah.
New pre-booking diversion program is optional for each county. And it gives the counties flexibility in how it's structured. And the thing is that one of my counties, Marion County, has been doing this for years, and they do a really good job at it. It's called the LEAD program. It's the Law Enforcement Assisted Diversion Program. So it's run by law enforcement. It's monitored with treatment and recovery services provided. They have a peer that walks along with them through this process. The way it's structured now with 4002A is every county could, if they wanted to, implement a LEAD type program in their county. But it's totally at the discretion of the county, and it's also at the discretion of the police officer on a case-by-case basis, depending on what the policies are for that county. They can decide whether this individual goes into pre-booking diversion or goes through booking.
You said it was law enforcement assisted
diversion.
Assisted diversion.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And it works. I've heard many success stories out of it. So that is available. But I tell you, Marion County has a lot of resources compared to some other counties. It's not necessarily a fit for every county.
Yeah, it's not. I think that one of the things that it's like good news and bad news, right? Good news is counties have discretion. They're not constrained from what they can do. They could kind of be a bit tougher if they wanted to.
Yeah.
But you can't divert people into a program that you don't have, right?
Well, we'll get to that. That's yeah.
Oh, the fun's still coming.
This bill also did something we really had to see, which was, it's called the Boyd-Hubbell fix. But basically, a few years ago, the Democrats voted to take away the ability to arrest a drug dealer. You had to, up until this bill, for a few years, you had to actually catch the dealer in the act of a transaction.
A court decision. Wasn't that a court decision too?
Well, maybe it was a court decision. I thought it was some legislation that was passed in the past. Maybe you're right, but this bill,
Hubbell, which I always thought was a space telescope, but
this bill fixes that problem.
Wow.
And Washington had to do the same thing. So now possession of a certain amount of drugs means you're a dealer. And you can be arrested, and you're going to face much stiffer sentencing if you're a dealer. So that's a big thing. It allows 72-hour holds for somebody, welfare holds. So there's a few things that this bill does a pretty good job at. The area where I have serious concerns is, one, it leaves a lot of discretion to the counties on how it's implemented.
Yeah.
County isn't required to put somebody into jail, for one. And I just question whether the Portland metro area is really going to see the relief that they're expecting. The other thing, the other huge one is it kept the Oversight and Accountability Council intact.
Yeah.
This big chunk of money that was taken away from police and schools is still overseen by this group that doesn't believe in what we just did, recriminalization and required treatment. But they're responsible for funding the programs that people will be diverted to. So how's that going to work? This group would love nothing more than to prove recriminalization doesn't work.
So that's like a poison pill almost to make it fail.
To me, it read like a poison pill, especially in the metro area. When I checked with my counties, and I've got Marion and Lynn County, they were like, they were a little bit ambivalent. They definitely wanted to see it pass. They thought we could do way better. But it's like, I think we can make this work in our county because we have law enforcement minded commissioners and district attorneys.
Yep.
And a police force. And so we believe, despite the poison pill portion of this, we think we can make this work. But I can't suddenly believe, Mike Schmidt, DA Mike Schmidt, testified in support of this bill. Do you think he suddenly became anti-crime and pro-law enforcement? No.
No, he became pro-re-election of Mike Schmidt.
He became pro-re-election. And then after the election, in my opinion, they can go back to what they were doing before, because I think really deep down, they believe in decriminalization. They want to buy more time. And that's why they did not change anything around this funding mechanism. They want to buy more time.
Well, and I think, isn't it true that not only did they buy more time, but they also got the ability to wait and see if that they can claim that the change of recriminalization didn't work. So they want to discredit it if they can sabotage it and not be held accountable for doing so.
They absolutely. We heard from a lot of them. They do want to discredit it. One of the tri-chairs of the Oversight and Accountability Council testified to us that required treatment does not work, which is a flat out falsehood.
Yeah,
it works.
Yeah.
If there's a percentage of the population of drug addicts that are not volunteering for treatment. So you either leave them in the street to slowly die, or you get them in treatment. It doesn't work every time, but it works sometimes. It's way more effective than leaving them on the street to die.
Well, isn't it true if you just have somebody volunteers, and the ones who don't volunteer can be compelled into it, win-win.
Yes.
So that what the opponents want is they want the people who volunteer for it basically to probably not have it available, but also they don't care about them. But the people who refuse it, they want to accommodate them, right?
They are accommodating. We're paying people with your tax dollars to travel the streets, hand out blankets, clean needles, and business cards saying, hey, if you need some help, call me. And when you're in the throes of these drugs, these are highly addictive drugs. You're not in your right mind. You're not in a position to be making that kind of a decision. And I've heard from too many people where it took them getting thrown in jail to get in a right mind, saying, I am killing myself. I'm throwing my life away. I need to do something different.
Yeah, they needed to be separated from the circumstances, the drugs, and the environment, and then say, wait a second, actually, I think I'm killing myself. Why don't I do something else?
Yeah.
And yet the entire point of these groups that want drug decriminalization is this what you said? It's bodily autonomy. I heard Max Williams really sail that idea, is like, this is bodily autonomy works for people who can make rational decisions.
Right. This is tolerance gone to hell.
Tolerance gone to hell.
Yeah.
I like that.
But Max, I got the chance to meet Max, and he is spot on this issue. We were very fortunate to have him advocating and to help push this bill toward where we wanted it to be. The other part that is worrisome with this is there's a lot of the opponents of recriminalization say that it's racist. It's inherently racist.
Yes.
And they do this by looking at outcomes. So if the outcomes of arrest are not proportional to the population by race, by definition, that's racism. That's how they use it. That's what, when you hear the word equity, that's what equity is. It's not equality. It's of opportunity. It's equity, equal outcomes.
Yeah.
And so in this bill, there's a requirement to do data collection on racial outcomes. Everybody on the left that opposed this bill called the bill racist. They called some members of the addiction committee who heard this bill racists. So we know that data is going to come in, and they're going to use that to again and be the rallying cry that Oregon law enforcement is racist if these outcomes are not equal across race. So
I think they feel like it worked for them before, so they're going back to that.
They're going to go back to that
when they can't debate it on the merits, and that is actually the thing. It's like so let's just take an example here. You go out and you encounter 10 people that need to be held accountable for a Class U misdemeanor, and it turns out that even though only 7% of the people in Portland are African American, which means out of those 10 people, technically only one, if you round up, should be black. But it turns out that 3 of them are. Then under the system that they think should exist, 2 of those people, regardless of their behavior, regardless of their actions and what the law says, should just be let go and released because of their skin color. So I think that's how it's like if you flip it around, that's how absurd their point of view is.
You are exactly right. And what do you think? What's the incentive for law enforcement? If they're going to be incentivized to use a quota system, just like you described.
Yeah.
So
you know what that system is? It's racist.
It's racism.
Because the 2 people who are black who need to get off the streets and get into treatment will be screwed by that system, by people who claim to be helping them.
So we will be harming the population that might need this help the most if we're actually trying to do this by race. It's ridiculous.
Yeah.
So I think so those are the 2 issues, primarily the one that keeps the Oversight and Accountability Council in charge of this thing. With totally conflicting priorities, but they still control the purse strings, and they would like nothing more than to see it fail. I can't help but think this is just being set up for failure.
Well, now, the one thing that I think is manifestly true is, however wise this might be, it's not going to radically change what's happening on the streets of our cities in the next, what do we got? We got about 5 months, right, until election.
Well, yeah.
And so what's going to happen is they might say that it's not that decriminalization is not working, but it's going to be too soon to say that. But it'll also be too soon for the situation to improve, and that's going to fall at the feet, isn't it, of the incumbent political party, the ones who are controlling this process of deciding its outcome of the legislation.
Yeah, I think every day people will be reminded of the policies that the Democrats put in place when they see the misery on their streets. They see these people every day leading up to election. And I hope they are reminded it wasn't the Republicans that created this.
No.
We introduced last year, we introduced bills that would have done flat out repeals of ballot measure 110, bills that would have reinvested the money into evidence-based treatment and recovery programs, that would have made it easier to go after drug dealers. Every one of those bills was flat out rejected by the Democrat leadership. They either didn't give it a hearing, or they gave it a hearing and didn't bring it to a vote in committee. So that's where they're at, only because of just enormous public outcry and the threat of a ballot measure. Did they act? And then they've only acted in a way that does it just enough, in my opinion, so they can claim, hey, we did something. And here's a tell too. The Oregonian is out there. Oregon decriminalizes drugs.
Yeah.
They're pushing that very simple message. They're not diving deep into what's behind the scenes in this bill.
No.
They're pushing that message. What's the message? Hey, voters, problems taken care of. The Democrats heard your message. You can continue to vote like you've been voting. That's the folks at the Oregonian. I'm sure that's what their agenda is. Because yeah. So in a way, kind of they're carrying water for the Democratic Party to push that message, and like, hey, we fixed it. Let's move on. No need to change how you vote.
And I think that this is all about the political battle. This is all about because fundamentally the streets aren't going to just dramatically change in the next 5 to 6 months, but there will be an outcome of an election one way or the other for every race.
Yeah. Yep.
So what do you think can be done to hold accountable the folks like the Oversight and Accountability Council and the people who support basically not succeeding, or the people that are supposed to enforce this, like Mike Schmidt? They're supposed to actually use the new tools that they have. I mean, it's no good if they don't use it, right?
Yeah, I think it's going to be that'll have to be up to the local voters. The way I see it is a county like Marion has been given some decent tools to make this happen, and we have the right mindset within law enforcement and the DAs and the county commissioners to make it happen. I think some other more rural counties have the right mindset, but they don't have the funding.
Yeah.
And I'm concerned that, yeah, it's great, put a diversion program in, but if you don't have a place to divert, what do you do? What do you have? And we have some counties that really don't have programs and really need funding. This bill does provide some funding, and we also passed another funding bill that is like a one-time capital infusion into some treatment programs and funding for law enforcement, but it's a one-time thing. So that will definitely help. But you're going to see it play out differently from county to county.
Well, I can tell you one thing about Portland and Multnomah County and in the Portland metro area is that they have multiple taxes. In addition to Measure 110, they have taxes that have been specifically placed to help the homeless and to help fight all of the addiction issues. They've got, Multnomah County is receiving state and federal money. They haven't spent a bunch of it. They apparently can't spend it fast enough. So a lot of the public is like, you got a lot of money, so I don't want to hear you don't have enough money to fix this.
I think they're sitting on what, $250 million of homeless money.
Yeah.
And that's what's left. They only spent 20% of that total bucket, and they're struggling to figure out how to spend the rest of it. And I was thinking of that in my floor speech on this House Bill 4002A, in that the Portland Metro leadership, they're not going to do this right. They're not going to figure out how to do this right. They can't even figure out how to spend that money to deal with their homeless problem. And if you look, I upset one of the representatives when I said that. I upset one of the representatives that represents Multnomah County. So he was actually sitting behind me. You can watch him in the video. I didn't realize how much until I saw the video, but he did respond to it. But it's a simple fact. Just look at how they've performed so far. They haven't demonstrated competence. So I don't have any confidence that they're going to be able to carry out House Bill 4.
See, you know what Max Williams said the other day when I got to him speak? He said, this actually was a perfect storm, Measure 110.
Yeah.
Because it happened after the George Floyd thing. There's a lot of people that have sort of white racial guilt. And so that's prevalent, that they feel like they have to vote for something, even if it doesn't really make sense. If
right.
They know what it is. And he said that it landed at a time when, shortly after it went into force in 3 months after the implementation date. So 3 months, which is no time to get treatment and recovery set up. But then they also were of the mindset that when they brought this into force, they weren't going to actually, like it was a belief that they were going to become effective. And he said Multnomah County was famously, before this, totally ineffective at doing programs like this.
Yeah.
So you pour a bunch of money into a county, and it's mainly the counties, right, that do this. And you say, here's a bunch of money, and here's something really important. You have a history of being ineffective at this. Now you're going to be effective. And it didn't. There was just no chance of that happening. He said it all came together at the same time. They had, the other thing that happened in early 2021 was when the border was opened up, extremely inexpensive fentanyl just flew in and then took over the entire situation with drugs. Now nearly every drug has fentanyl in it. Which becomes the predominant source of both addiction and overdose.
Yeah. He's right on that. It was a perfect storm. And ballot measure 110 didn't create the problem we have, but it made it a heck of a lot worse. And what baffles me is when ballot measure 110 passed, the legislature, the Democrat legislature, just rubber stamped it. They didn't critique it. It was a poorly written ballot measure with a completely unrealistic timeline on it. They could have tweaked it. They could have tweaked it to, hey, let's give it a few years before we roll it out. Let's get some treatment systems in place or something. But they didn't do any of that.
Like they've been doing with campaign finance. And I have opinions about how campaign finance should work, but let's say the public express their opinion. They want campaign finance limitations to exist. Yeah. But they've taken at least 2 years to get around to implementing the will of the voters. It just shows that with Measure 110, they were all on board with it because they had no intention of slowing it down and deliberately implementing it.
No, and it came right on the heels of all these. There were some Senate bills around the same time that took a lot of the tools that law enforcement had in place to make arrests. to pull somebody over.
Yeah.
It took all those tools away. And so we get I don't know. I look at it and I go, well, yeah, you pass these laws and you're going to see exactly what we see today.
Yeah.
It shouldn't surprise us.
It's a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah.
And a lot of these guys actually knew it, which is the worst part of it. They kind of knew this was what was going to happen, and they championed it. Now, you mentioned about drug dealers. I remember hearing for the first time a couple of years ago, it was when Kevin Barton, early in his re-election run, I talked to some of the assistant DAs in Washington County, and one of them said, well, yeah, here's what changed. They said it was a court decision. So that's why I was referring to that, the Hubble decision. And maybe there was also,
right. Now that I think about it, I think you're right. Thank you.
Well, there might have been a bill too at some point, but they said a court decided that even if you found somebody with a bunch of balloons, which is what they use for packaging the stuff, burner phones, a ton of drugs, like fentanyl, and like a lot of cash. If you found somebody like that, you couldn't do anything unless you witnessed the transaction. And the transactions were taking place inside tents that Multnomah County was giving to them. And so, no, you're not going to see a live transaction. And everybody who knows that that was the vulnerability, they're not going to do a live transaction in front of a police officer. So it decriminalized drug dealing, which obviously supercharged the problem. Yeah.
Yeah. It definitely did. And Washington State had the same issue and did the fix a little bit before we did.
So this could be an improvement if they enforce it, if they actually arrest these guys.
Yeah. It could be an improvement. It's going to require to work. It requires funding to law enforcement, funding to the courts. We need places to divert people to, and treatment. And we got to realize treatment and recovery is for the long haul. You're not going to run somebody through a 30-day, 90-day treatment program and then say, hey, go back to the same place you were at with the same group of friends that you got in trouble with in the first place. No.
Yeah, it's exiting addiction.
Yeah, there's got to be a recovery system in place that reinforces and supports that person coming out. And we just have to accept that is going to cost some money. And we'll have better communities for it. I want to be able to take my grandkids to a park without worrying about stepping into the needle or seeing some drug deal go down.
Well, so that was the big one. That was Measure 110. That was sort of the center, and actually did pass. You know, for once, the annual session dealt with an emergency.
Yeah,
was supposed to be, right?
Yep.
So other things going on in the session. So I don't remember. I know that there was that property tax, statewide property tax bill.
Yeah.
That died, didn't it? Or is it?
It died. Yeah, it died. It never was going to have any feet. You want to commit political suicide? Pass a statewide property tax.
Yeah, stick it to the people on fixed income and low income. Beautiful idea.
I never saw any. I think it had one sponsor on it, Representative Evans, and I don't think it had anybody else.
So I talked to Jason Williams from the Taxpayer Association. He said there were like 800 or 1,000 like negative comments, and there were eight in favor of it. Eight comments, and he looked at out of the 8 comments who provided them. 4 of them were from Paul Evans. I know. I know. The sponsor.
Jason really got the word out.
Yes.
And boy, the feedback came pouring in, which is great. So.
Oh, that's a sign that it can make a difference. I think that's hopeful. Like people are like, "Oh, it makes no difference what I do." And it's like, well, actually, we killed that one.
When people are paying attention, and that's the thing, Kevin. it's not like regular people have a lobby group in that building.
No.
Uh, so people have to be speaking up, because a lot of the priorities that I hear when I'm in the building are different than what I hear in my community. So I try and, as best I can, keep people in tune to what bills are coming up and encourage people to provide feedback. And groups like Taxpayers Association of Oregon, they do a great job in
Yeah.
advocating tax related bills like this one. But we have no choice anymore but to get engaged in this process, because it's up to us to take the state back. Nobody else is going to do it.
Yeah, there's no anybody who tells me, well, it's pointless doing anything. I'm like, so do you think by doing nothing you'll get more of what you want? There aren't any lobbyists saying, well, if I just do nothing, I'll probably get more of what I want. No lobbyist says that. So why would you think that on your own behalf you would get more? Now, taxation and spending bills, it doesn't sound like there was a whole lot in this session, which is
well, there's there was a pretty big spending bill associated with ballot measure 110 reform.
Yeah, it's like a couple $100 million or something.
Couple $100 million. And I did vote for that bill. I felt there was more good in there than bad, but it provided funding for law enforcement, and it provided some funding for some capital projects to build out some treatment and rehab services. One actually going in my district, Bridgeway Community Services does an excellent job. They've been around for a long time, providing detox and treatment and recovery services. They know what they're doing. That's just one example. But then there's another bill which should have a pretty big fiscal, and that's the Governor Kotek's housing bill.
Yeah. That's the one that, supposedly was going to go after the issues around land use and zoning and all these things, where it's like one part of the government's trying to get housing built and another part of the government's saying, no, you can't. And they sort of like, red tape each other to death, and nothing gets done, but some money still gets spent. Amazing.
Yeah.
Is this bill taking a step in the right direction, even with the big price tag?
Yeah, and I don't know the price tag associated with it yet. I know part of it.
Yeah.
But it has some, the most controversial piece to it is it will allow cities to expand their UGB.
Yeah.
And do some land swaps is probably the best way to think of it. It's very restricted on what kind of land would qualify as including in adding to the UGB. But it basically gives cities a one-time shot, and depending on the size of your city, that determines how much acreage you can bring in. And there's also some other pieces that would allow exceptions to the building standards. So if a community wanted to provide more high density housing, for example, there's a few other things that would be allowed. And then there's also it's a revolving loan program. So OHCS will have I think it's a $77 million program of no interest loans to developers if you're developing housing with a certain percentage of affordable housing. I'm really skeptical that the last two programs I talked about are going to get any takers. They're very prescriptive, and I don't know if any developers are going to want to go down that path.
Yeah, complex is not good.
Yeah.
When you're trying to attract private businesses to do something, and if you create some kind of Rube Goldberg scheme that no one can understand and it's just too complicated with a bunch of dependencies, then you might even offer them zero interest loans, and there might be no interest in zero interest. Crazy.
Yeah. And so I don't know that for sure. Some people I've talked to feel the same way. And so we'll see how that goes. But the most controversial piece is with the UGB expansion.
That one.
Yeah.
So, did we manage to avoid any more House Bill 2002 style bills with crazy gender ideology? Did any of that kind of squirt through here into the session?
There's one bill that gets to that, and that's Senate Bill 1583. I don't know if you've heard of that one, but that bill would prohibit school boards, in our reading of the bill, would prohibit school boards from being able to choose the curriculum.
Oh, yes.
And what goes in the library to some extent. And the way we're reading it is it would prevent those school boards from removing, for example, in some cases, sexually explicit materials. And so there's been tremendous pushback on that. I don't know where that bill sits right now. I'm keeping my fingers crossed that it just disappears.
Yeah.
Because there's been intense pushback. You talk about a community, say with that property tax bill, hundreds of people wrote in because it's taking local control away from the school boards.
Yeah.
I want local control. I've got schools in my district that do a good job. I got public schools in my district that have a waiting list of students to come in because they're leaving a neighboring school district by the hundreds because it's doing such a poor job teaching their kids.
Yeah.
Moving their kids to a neighboring school district. So.
Well, that's good to know that maybe that one's getting a lot of heat. That we'll keep our eye on that one.
Yeah.
There wasn't anything on the energy front, I don't think. Despite we all learned what not having energy was like during the ice storm.
There's and I don't have all the details on this one, but there's a wind farm, offshore wind bill.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe that it would require all the contracts there's certain requirements about using union labor and Oregon labor for offshore wind contracts. And frankly, have we ever talked about offshore wind yet? But I am not a fan of offshore wind.
No, I'm somewhat familiar with it. They've decided, despite the vociferous and vehement opposition of people in Coos County and Curry County, to locate some of these off the shore. And by the way, I believe that one of the big drawbacks of this, besides the fact that it's not great for whales, windmills also are bad for birds. The Native American tribes are pretty unhappy with it. The people the fishermen are really unhappy with it. It's being imposed by the Biden administration through the Bureau of Energy, Ocean Management, and but also it has a history on the East Coast, such as most recently in New Jersey, of literally losing billions of dollars. So you put it all out there. It takes years for it to produce anything. And it has all these consequences. People hate it. And then it loses, I think in New Jersey, it was like $6 billion and it goes bankrupt.
I can't believe we're still even talking about it.
No, that doesn't sound like a formula for success.
And then the East Coast is a lot different than the West Coast. You go out there a bit, it gets deep where they want to put these. I believe it's deeper than any others that have been installed.
Yeah,
they're not even exactly sure how the engineering is going to work on that. And plus, we have a fault line out there. We're going to put our energy source right on top of a fault line. I don't know if that's even been discussed, but it doesn't make a lot of sense to me.
Yeah, that's where the Cascadia subduction zone starts, right?
These will be maintenance nightmares. Maintenance nightmares. You know, I look at what we could do so easily on 20 acres with nuclear power.
Oh, I know. Well, we've talked about that many times. It's
Yeah.
like what they're doing by taking up prime farmland or putting up all these offshore windmills that lose money.
Yeah.
and require government subsidies to remain. Like when you factor in the government subsidies and the amount of electricity they produce, they actually, consume more resources than they generate, and yet they want to do it anyway because it must make some white progressives in Eugene or Portland feel good.
It feels good.
Yeah.
It feels good. That's what it's about.
Well, then we need
Sure
a tax
hits your
system there.
pocketbook hard. PGE is looking at, well, what did folks see this year? 17% increase.
Yeah.
We've already give heads up that they're going to do another 7.5% in, I think, 25.
Yeah, which
And
compounds from year to year.
it's all driven by mandates from the state. Most of it green energy mandates from the state.
And what they could do is with Oregon born and raised technology from, say, Oregon State University, like what NewScale has, they could take couple dozen acres and generate everything they need with no carbon dioxide emission to make them feel good, but they won't do it.
They won't do it.
Well, we're going to keep working on it. That's where we take it to the ballot box and to the voters, right?
Yeah.
So you mentioned a bill. I think it was 4130. And this is one that you wanted to highlight because it seems to have slithered through the process and even gotten some people that might not otherwise vote for something. And it is a bill that, if I understand it correctly, in essence, takes, see, I have it right up here. It's essentially going to make it so that small medical private practice can't be owned by corporations.
Yeah, think of it as banning the corporate practice of healthcare. And the way I look at it is, well, that doesn't sound that bad. I want my care provider to be locally owned, and having the doctor own the practice. I like that concept completely. But for the state to ban it, there's something going on that is driving the corporate ownership of healthcare in the first place. And this bill does nothing, absolutely nothing, to fix those problems. And that's the issue I have with it. It's just the state coming in and mandating how a business is to be run. The worst part of this is that it is retroactive for an existing. If you have an existing business, Kevin, let's say here's a typical structure for some of these businesses. You have a practice with a few doctors. It's majority owned by the doctors. The doctors contract with a management service organization. The management service organization provides the administrative, they do the administrative stuff, they do the billing, they handle a lot of the back office stuff. And they have contracts in place because those management service organizations, they need to be secure, and that they're also making an investment in this program.
Yeah.
Quite often those programs are owned in part by the doctors. And quite often there's pretty nuanced contracts between the doctors and these MSOs. Well, this bill says you have 7 years to restructure your business, to meet this 40 pages of requirements for how that business is structured. I've been in business. I wasn't in the healthcare business, but I started a business with my partners. We had a written operating agreement, what my ownership was, how we made decisions, what happens if I decide to leave or they decide to leave, how do we handle profits, how do we handle reinvestments. All that stuff's laid out in that agreement. I cannot imagine the state coming in and telling me that, okay, hey, great job building this business up. Now you got 7 years to change it. And some of these folks are telling me that it makes their business worthless. They won't be able to sell their business anymore. And we've got people that have been providing critical care in this state. They risk their own capital, sweat equity to build these practices up. and now they're being told that their business model is illegal. These aren't, the bill was written, we got to stop Amazon and these big companies from coming in and buying these practices. But that may be part of the target for this bill, but the unintended consequences is hammering these other businesses that have been here for years, providing essential services, doing a good job. And there's a reason they're structured in the way they are. I had an example. This came up. There's a dialysis company in Tillamook, and this is a sad story. It's a corporate owned from out of state. They owned a dialysis operation in Tillamook. They were having trouble making a go of it, and they closed it down. And so this was used as an example of how evil, how bad corporate ownership was. If only this practice had been owned by a doctor. Well, why doesn't a doctor pick it up right now?
You can just buy it right now.
Because he can't pencil it out.
Yeah, you can't do something you lose money at.
Yeah. There's a reason that corporation came in and did what they did. If this bill, and I told them that if this bill had been in place years ago, that dialysis office wouldn't be there today, because you would have banned the corporate ownership of it. And there's no doctor that wants to do it there, because if there was, they'd be doing it.
Yeah.
So the problems that are there that are preventing doctors from having their own practice are really low reimbursement rates from Medicare and Medicaid. They don't cover the cost of care.
Yep.
We have huge burdens on administrative costs and all that stuff that have just, a doctor wants to take care of patients. They don't want to do all the paperwork.
Yeah.
And then the medical professionals coming out of school now, what I've been told by a lot of people is they're just not interested in having a private family practice. They want to go in, work for somebody, make some money. They're not. They have different goals than the doctors that were entering this field a couple decades ago. It's just changed. So this bill will do nothing to improve or increase access to care. It's only going to restrict care in the state.
Well, so this is when I see these two names on a bill, I immediately my perception sharpens. One is Representative Chaichi, and the other is Representative Gamba. Gamba's the one who thinks that the natural gas bans are a good idea.
Yeah.
So I'm like, okay, I don't know if I want to see what else this guy can come up with. The other one is Representative Chaichi, who I believe has a photo or a picture in her office. I think it's a Mao or Lenin.
Really?
Marx. Yeah, that was because they did. Somebody kind of blew the whistle on her, and so she's a communist.
Well, I knew that.
Yeah, well, she's not hiding it. She's not like, how dare you call me a communist? It's like, yeah, I'm a communist. Yep. And so we should all be reading bills very closely and talking to people who are affected when a communist thinks it's a good idea.
Yeah, this, the chief sponsor is Ben Bowman, and actually I've worked together with Ben on other bills. I get along with him. I do disagree with him on things. This is one that I really strongly disagree. And I told him I got to come out and speak strongly against this one. I just don't think it's in the best interest of Oregonians to do this.
So this bill has been through the House, and it had a public hearing on February 7th, a work session where they vote on the 19th. Then it went, there was a third reading. So I guess that's the final vote in the House, the 22nd. And then it went to the Senate. And there was a public hearing and then a work session, which I went to very quickly, despite, didn't you say something happened in that?
Yeah, let me tell you this. You think it operates like a democracy in there. This was, I was blown away. I was blown away. So there's a hearing, and the chair says there'll be 30 minutes to hear this bill, and which was odd that they put a time limit on it. But by this time, it went through the House. By this time, more and more people in the state had heard what was going on. So all these business folks came in to testify against this bill. They are upset about this bill. Some of them drove hours to get in there to testify. They've all signed up in advance. So they have a panel which includes former Governor John Kitzhaber.
He was in favor of it.
And he's in favor of the bill. And the first thing during this hearing, he proceeds to impugn the motives of some of the members of that bill committee, saying, I know you've all been contacted by big corporate lobby firms, and but Senator Bonham kind of read him the riot act in a polite way. After that, that's just something you do not do. You should have done better. So that probably took, I don't know, 20 minutes, 25 minutes. Then I went up and I testified in opposition to the bill, and I left. I thought, okay, it's going to proceed. They let one company come up and testify in opposition, and then they said, "Oh, we're going to close out the session." I guess some people said, "Well, hey, what about us? We're ready to testify." Well, please submit your testimony in writing. Then they proceeded to a work session. They went ahead and proceeded to vote on the bill. I mean, that was a big middle finger to all those people, all those citizens and business owners that traveled all that way to come to hear that bill. Then before they did the work session, after telling all these people that they couldn't testify, the chair read a letter in support of the bill from someone else. But apparently it wasn't just me that was really
aghast
about this. Because what happened is they pulled the bill back into Senate rules, I think it is, to allow they're going to basically revote and allow the people to come back and testify.
Well, that's good. So that's happening between 3 and 5 p.m. on the 4th, it looks like. So right before our show is going to air here.
Yeah.
And it's in hearing room C. But it is also true that now that folks hear about this, even if you can't go in person, you really should actually submit some written testimony, which you can do, I think, for up to 48 hours after, or maybe it depends. It might be different now.
Yeah, I think right now you might not get 48 hours. The things are moving so fast.
So do it tomorrow.
Do it tomorrow. Yeah.
Well, that could make a big difference, because one of the things about it is that if this bill has the effect that you're talking about and that people are warning about, it's actually going to reduce healthcare services that we say we need.
It will, because whether we like it or not, we've created a system that incentivizes this kind of corporate ownership and consolidation. So, you don't just mandate that it can't happen.
Yeah.
You change the incentives. That's what we should be doing. This bill doesn't do it. It's like taking a hammer to a problem that should be dealt with.
Well, this is really good. I'm really glad you brought this one forward so folks can grapple with it. Talk to the representatives, talk to their senators. Everybody needs to know what's going on with this, but particularly to their senators and the committee on rules. Let's see here. I just wanted to make sure that folks knew that. So there's Tim Knopp is in there. He's the Senate minority leader. Bill Hansel, Republican senator. The other ones are Kate Lieber, who's the Senate majority leader, Democrat. Senator James Manning, who's running for, I think, Secretary of State.
Yeah.
And then Senator Elizabeth Steiner, who's running for state treasurer. So these guys actually want to get elected to stuff. Maybe they need to hear just how bad this bill is.
Any business owner should be outraged that the state could come in and dictate after the fact how your business needs to be organized. I just find it appalling.
And diminish its value if you decide
Diminish its
you wanted to
value.
sell it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And if you can't sell it, then you just eventually decide I'm just going to stop doing
Yeah.
business, then there's less health care provided.
Right. Right.
Well, it's I think there's more evidence that there should be a bill maybe banning government from
Hey, I like that. Maybe I could sponsor that one in 2025.
I would love
I'll
it.
put your name down as the inspiration for it.
Go right ahead. I think that we've got decades of evidence behind us.
Yeah.
And plenty of people who would testify in favor of it. And we'd love to actually give you enough state representatives to join you so that we could actually maybe get it passed.
I think that's the big battle ahead of us. If we want to change anything in this state, we need to get more balance in the legislature. And that's the task ahead of us. In 1 week, we'll be done with session. And then it's a matter of campaigning and getting good folks elected.
Yep. People will be filing for office. And in the meantime, OregonLegislature.gov is where they can go and they can find all this information about the bills, about who's on the committees and when these things are going to take place. And it's actually really super easy. I've done testimony and it's so easy. You just click and then it just says fill it in. That's it.
Oh yeah. Real easy.
So I hope everybody does that. Well, thanks for enlightening us today. Thank you for explaining the Measure 110 reform bill and exactly where it's at, because so many people are being affected by this. It's a huge issue in the state. And, you know, these other things that sort of fall off the beaten path, I think everybody's done with finding out how bad an idea can be after it's been passed into law.
Yeah. Yeah.
Measure 110 front and center on that one.
A mess. Yeah, Kevin, it's been great being here with you again, and look forward to next time.
Wonderful. And everyone, you can what's your website so that people can
eddeal.com and you can find links to all my social media there. I try and stay very active on X, formerly Twitter, at real_eddeal. And you can also find me on Facebook and Instagram. But go to eddeal.com and you can find all the links to my social media there.
That's DIEHL.
Yep.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for being with us. And good luck with everything this week in the final week of the short session. And we'll be watching and looking forward to hearing from you the next opportunity.
Yeah. All right. Thank you.
Good night, everyone. And we'll see you on the next episode of The Captive Audience.